frightening story in the New York Times today. I don't know that people have digested it, but the headline is, "Life Expectancy Shrinks for Less Educated Whites in the United States." And let me quote, generally speaking, the trend for life expectancy in the United States and all over the world has been going up. And the goal of a good society and a strong healthcare system is to see that people live longer, healthier, happier lives. But as a result of the devastating attacks in a variety of ways on the working class of this country over a period of years, not just starting yesterday, this is where we are. Let me quote from this article, and I hope people hear this, because this is really shocking stuff. And I quote, the steepest declines in life expectancy were for white women without a high school diploma who lost 5 years of life between 1990 and 2008, whose life expectancy went down by 5 years. This is astronomical. And going back to the article, said Jay Olshansky, a public health professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago and the lead investigator on the study, published last month in Health Affairs. By 2008, what happened is between 1990 and 2008, an 18-year period, life expectancy for white women without a high school diploma declined by 5 years. White men lacking a high school diploma lost 3 years of life. Life expectancy for both blacks and Hispanics of the same education level rose, the data showed, rose. But blacks overall do not live as long as whites, while Hispanics live longer than both whites and blacks. And so let's digest what that means. I held as chairman of the Subcommittee on Aging and Primary Care last year. We held a hearing entitled "Poverty as a Death Sentence." Poverty as a death sentence. And what that hearing pointed out, that people who are in the top 20% live, as I recall, about 6 years longer than people in the bottom 20%. But what new evidence is suggesting is that people without a high school degree, the least educated people in America, often the poorest people in America, are now seeing, both women and men, a significant decline in their life expectancy, moving in exactly the wrong direction. Now, the authors of the study are not exactly sure why this is taking place. Many low-income, uneducated people are using drugs, cutting short their lives. Healthcare, lack of healthcare, is certainly one of the reasons. More and more low-income people can't access healthcare, which is why it is so important that we defeat the Obama-Ryan effort to devastate, as Senator Harkin just said, Medicaid, and throw millions and millions of people off of health insurance. If life expectancy for low-income people is now going down, think of what it will mean if we throw millions more off of Medicaid. It is a death sentence. Mr. President, I also want to say a word on the issue of Social Security, and I want to thank you and Senators Whitehouse and Senators Begich for joining me yesterday in releasing a letter which had 29 signatures on it from members of the United States Senate, and that letter was pretty simple. What it said is that Social Security has not added a nickel to the deficit, because Social Security, of course, is funded by the payroll tax. And it said that Social Security has a $2.7 trillion surplus, can pay out all benefits to eligible Americans for the next 21 years, so that it is absolutely wrong and bad public policy to be talking about cutting Social Security within the context of deficit reduction when Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit. The reason that we are in a deficit situation today in a significant way, the reason that we have gone a very long way in the wrong direction since January 2001, when Bill Clinton left office with a $236 billion surplus, has nothing to do with Social Security. It has everything to do with Bush and those people who voted for 2 wars and forgot to pay for them, added it to the deficit. Those people who gave huge tax breaks, much of it going to the richest people in this country, forgot to pay for it, passed the Medicare Part D prescription drug program, forgot to pay for it, and a recession caused by Wall Street, which resulted in lower revenue coming into the federal government. Those are the reasons why we're in a deficit, not because of Social Security. And what concerns me, Mr. President, is that 4 years ago, I understand Republicans want to cut Social Security. That's what they do. They're not very sympathetic to Social Security, have opposed Social Security for years, don't believe the government should be involved in retirement security, want to balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, the sick, the children, the poor, give tax breaks to the rich. I understand that. More and more Americans understand that. But I'll tell you what I am concerned about, Mr. President. I am concerned about President Obama. 4 years ago, the President was very, very clear on this issue. And when the President was running for election against Senator McCain, this is what he told AARP, and ironically, he just spoke to AARP, I believe it was today. So 4 years ago, same venue. This is what he said 4 years ago. John McCain's campaign has suggested that the best answer for the growing pressures on Social Security might be to cut cost of living adjustments or raise the retirement age. Let me be clear, I will not do either, end of quote, candidate Barack Obama 4 years ago. Well, Barack Obama is in the White House now. We have people like billionaire Pete Peterson, who's been pushing deficit reduction on the backs of working people for years now, spending huge amounts of money to make sure we do deficit reduction, not by asking the wealthiest people in this country to pay their fair share, by balancing it on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. These guys have come up with a strategy called the chain CPI. Now, nobody in America outside of Capitol Hill knows what the chain CPI is. And what it is a new formulation as to how we determine cost of living adjustments, COLAs, for seniors. And what these economists have decided, these right-wing economists have decided, is COLAs today are formulated in a way that are too generous for American seniors and for disabled veterans. And they want to reformulate how we come up with these COLAs. If they get their way, and I have a great deal of fear that unless some of us stop them, unless the American people stop them, they will in fact get their way. What this will mean is that if you're 65 years of age today, by the time you're 75, you'll lose about $560 a year in your benefits. And if you're 65 years of age today, in 20 years when you're 85, you'll lose $1,000 a year. So let me be very clear. I do not believe that you should move to a deficit reduction on the backs of a senior citizen living on $14,000 or $15,000 a year and take $1,000 away from them and then get on the floor of the Senate and talk about how we have to give more tax breaks to billionaires. I think that is not only morally inexcusable, I think it is bad economics. Bad economics. And what we're talking about in this so-called chain CPI, which will cut benefits for seniors, you're also talking about cutting VA benefits for disabled veterans. So I want to hear all these tough guys here who think we should balance the budget on the backs of the elderly and the children. Let them get up here and tell us why you think that when somebody fought in a war to defend the United States, maybe they lost their legs or their eyes or their arms, you want to cut their benefits and then you want to give tax breaks to billionaires. Well, the American people don't want to do that. So I think we've got to get on the phones right now. We've got to call our senators, and we've got to call members of the House, and we have got to call President Obama. Mr. President, 4 years ago, you told us you weren't going to cut Social Security. Is that still your position? 4 years ago, you came up with an idea that is, in fact, exactly the right idea. You made the point that multimillionaires are contributing the same amount of money into the Social Security Trust Fund as somebody making $110,000. And 4 years ago, you made the point that if we lift that cap, and you don't have to start at 110, you go up to 250. You lift that cap above 250,000, you could bring in enough revenue to fund Social Security for the next 75 years. That was your position, Mr. President, 4 years ago. Is that your position today? Are you going to stand up to the Republicans and the Wall Street folks who want us to cut Social Security? So that is where we are right now. Last point that I want to make. I want to comment on the much-discussed remarks that Governor Romney made that were released recently in that video that has gone all over the Internet. And there's a lot that can be said about it, and I suspect everybody has said a lot that can be said about it. I just want to pick up on one point, and maybe I feel strongly about this point, Mr. President, because I am the son of working class family, of a father who never made a lot of money but worked hard his entire life, and of a mother who raised her kids as best she could. So I take this kind of personally. And this is what Mr. Romney said in connection with the famous 47% of the people who don't pay taxes, which is not really true, of course. As we know, they pay Social Security tax and gasoline taxes, Medicare taxes. But be that as it may, that's not the issue I want to get to. This is what he said. He said, my job, Mr. Romney says, my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives, end of quote. Let me repeat that. I will never convince them that they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives, end of quote. Well, he was talking about my parents. He was talking about the parents of millions of people who worked hard their whole lives and don't need advice from a multimillionaire who went to elite schools and had all the money and privileges that his family could provide him. We don't need advice from him to families who have worked and struggled their whole lives to, in fact, take personal responsibility to make sure that their kids did well. That is an incredibly arrogant statement from a guy surrounded by money, speaking to millionaires who should not be making that statement. People on Social Security today, people on Medicare, in many cases, have worked their entire lives, have done the best that they can to provide for their kids, have seen their kids go to college. Many of the people on Social Security, Medicare, have fought in wars defending this country. They do not need advice from a multimillionaire about how they should take personal responsibility for their lives. That is an insulting remark, and it would become Governor Romney really to apologize for that remark. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Utah.
I'm not asked how much time I have.
There's no control time.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
You have as much time as you like.
Thank you so much.
Anyway.